Before he became one of the most electrifying finishers in UFC history, Charles Oliveira was already a figure shrouded in contradiction, equal parts brilliance and chaos, dominance and vulnerability. Rising from the rough streets of Guarujá, Brazil, he built a career defined not by safety or caution, but by danger. Every time he stepped into the cage, something spectacular happened. He broke records for most submissions and most finishes in UFC history, dismantled elite contenders like Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje, and carried an intensity that made every second with him feel like a countdown to something unforgettable. But behind the triumphs was a storm the public rarely understood. The mid-career collapse, the accusations that he quit under pressure, the dramatic weight cut incident that cost him his lightweight title by half a pound, the emotional burden of carrying an entire nation's expectations while fighting ghosts from a past he could never fully outrun. For years, the world celebrated his rise but overlooked the deeper story, the fractures, the doubt, the moments that nearly broke him long before he became champion. And when the UFC found itself relying on him to anchor one of its most important divisions, the question shifted from admiration to unease. What was really happening behind Charles Oliveira's meteoric ascent, and why was the organization so afraid of losing him? To understand how Bronx became both irreplaceable and unpredictable, we must return to where the legend was forged, before the fame, before the records, before the chaos. Long before the world knew him as Bronx, Charles Oliveira was just a thin, sickly kid growing up in the favelas of Guarujá, Brazil, a place where survival often mattered more than dreams. Diagnosed with a severe heart condition and bone disease as a child, doctors warned that he might never run again, let alone fight. But Oliveira learned early that limitations could be defied, and hardship could be shaped into something stronger. While other children played, he watched from the sidelines, imagining a world where his body no longer failed him. And when he finally recovered enough to train, he stepped into a small jiu-jitsu gym that would alter the course of his entire life. From his very first session, Oliveira moved differently. Coaches saw it instantly. The flexibility, the instincts, the ability to anticipate submissions before opponents even realized they were in danger. As he competed across Brazil, word spread that a prodigy was emerging from one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country. But genius alone didn't define his rise. Hunger did. Oliveira trained like someone who knew that fighting wasn't a sport, it was his only way out. By 2010, at just 20 years old, he was signed to the UFC, making an immediate impact with a lightning-fast submission that stunned the organization. Analysts called him a future champion. Fans called him the most dangerous grappler they had ever seen. His finishes came not from brute force, but from a fluid, effortless creativity that made every exchange feel like a trap waiting to spring. Yet it wasn't just his jiu-jitsu that caught attention. Oliveira evolved, sharpening his striking and developing a pressure-heavy style that overwhelmed veterans and rising contenders alike. Victories over fighters like Jim Miller, Kevin Lee, and later Tony Ferguson fueled the belief that Oliveira wasn't merely climbing the rankings, he was transforming into a complete, terrifyingly efficient finisher. Brazil embraced him as the next great hope, a successor to legends like Anderson Silva and Jose Aldo. His rise seemed unstoppable, the fulfillment of a destiny forged from hardship. But destiny rarely comes without conflict. And while his talent carried him upward, something far more unpredictable was waiting at the next stage of his journey. Because just as Oliveira reached the threshold of greatness, the first cracks began to appear, moments of hesitation, moments of collapse, moments that critics would twist into accusations that threatened everything he had built. And that is when the scandals began. For a fighter as gifted as Charles Oliveira, the world expected a straight rise to glory. But his journey was anything but smooth. Early in his UFC career, a pattern began to emerge, moments where brilliance collided with collapse. Losses to fighters like Max Holloway, Cub Swanson, and later Paul Felder fueled criticism that Oliveira struggled when fights became gritty. Analysts accused him of folding under pressure. Fans questioned his toughness, and commentators wondered aloud whether he lacked the mental fortitude required to become a champion. Each defeat didn't just damage his record, it created a narrative that would follow him for years. But the most defining controversies came later. When Oliveira finally surged into title contention, he carried the weight of past accusations. Every setback, every moment of vulnerability was magnified. And then came the incident that shook his entire career. UFC 274, the weigh-in that changed everything. Oliveira stepped onto the scale expecting to defend his title, only to be declared 0.5 pounds overweight, making him the first champion in UFC history to be stripped before stepping into the cage. The backlash was immediate. Oliveira insisted the scale was off. Other fighters claimed it had been altered. Fans demanded answers. The UFC maintained its ruling. Overnight, he went from champion to contender not because of a loss, but because of a fraction of a pound. This was more than a scandal. It was humiliation on the global stage. And yet Oliveira entered the fight anyway, destroying Justin Gaethje with a performance so clinical it raised more questions than it answered. If he was strong enough to dominate like that, how did he miss weight? Was it a mistake, a miscommunication, or something deeper, something behind the scenes that the public was never meant to know? Then came the criticisms about his physical durability. Despite his submission mastery and aggressive strike-heavy style, critics pointed to fights where Oliveira appeared rocked, questioning whether his ability to absorb punishment was deteriorating. After years of evolving from a fragile prospect into a monster of a finisher, these discussions stung deeply. They painted a picture of a legend whose body was caught between two extremes: extraordinary offense and unpredictable defense. Internal tensions added fuel to the fire. Rumors circulated about disagreements with UFC matchmakers over timing, opponents, and promotional treatment. Oliveira, a hero in Brazil, felt at times that the UFC didn't see him with the same respect his home country did. The controversy surrounding his weigh-ins only deepened that divide. But perhaps the most revealing part of these scandals was not what they exposed about Oliveira, but what they exposed about the UFC. Every controversy, every setback, every moment the organization questioned him had financial implications far beyond the cage. Because when a fighter as explosive as Oliveira becomes unstable, so does the division he anchors. And that brings forward a truth most fans never consider. Behind every scandal is a financial storm the UFC must navigate. Behind every controversy is a number that matters more than accusations revenue. Which is why, to truly understand Charles Oliveira's place in this sport, we have to follow the money. Long before he became a champion, Charles Oliveira was already one of the most financially valuable fighters the UFC had on its roster. They just didn't realize it yet. His style was pure volatility, a combination of high-risk striking and world-class grappling that produced something the UFC craves more than belts or rankings: finishes. And finishes translate directly into numbers, viewership, engagement, social media spikes, and ultimately, revenue. As Oliveira evolved into a championship-caliber force, the numbers around him began to shift. His fight purses grew from modest five-figure paydays to $300,000, $750,000 per bout, with additional bonuses stacking on top. But those figures tell only part of the story. The real financial surge came from his ability to elevate pay-per-view buys, even when he wasn't the card's main promotional star. His fights against Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje generated tens of millions of dollars collectively, far more than the typical lightweight contender bout. Why? Because Oliveira offered something unique: unpredictability. Fans didn't just watch to see if he would win, they watched to see how. A flying submission? A comeback knockout? A wild brawl exploding into a choke? No fighter delivered controlled chaos like Bronx, and chaos sells. Outside the cage, his value expanded even further. In Brazil, Oliveira became a national icon, crossing the line from athlete to cultural figure. Sponsorship deals, media appearances, gym partnerships, charity events, each one grew his financial footprint and tightened the UFC's reliance on him. Brazil remains one of the UFC's biggest international markets, with millions of viewers tuning in for every major event. And after the declines that followed the later careers of Anderson Silva, Jose Aldo, and Lyoto Machida, Oliveira became the centerpiece of a market the UFC could not afford to let go cold. Then came the turning point. Oliveira became one of the few fighters whose popularity didn't collapse after losses. Unlike other stars whose fan bases evaporate with every setback, Oliveira's support grew. His vulnerability, his backstory, his emotional honesty, they made him relatable. And relatability is a marketing asset money can't easily buy. Behind the scenes, this created a dilemma for the UFC. Oliveira was not the traditional, clean-cut champion they could easily mold. He was unpredictable, emotional, occasionally chaotic, yet ironically commercially reliable. Every time he fought, the financial outcome was the same: big numbers. And that reliability came with its own cost. The UFC couldn't easily push him aside, even when promotional narratives would have been cleaner with other athletes. Lightweight is one of the richest divisions in UFC history, yet no contender, not even rising stars, could replicate Oliveira's ability to produce excitement and revenue simultaneously. This is why the scandals didn't sink him, why missing weight didn't erase him, why critics questioning his durability never mattered in boardrooms. Because the truth is simple: Charles Oliveira wasn't just a fighter. He became an economic engine, one that fueled a division, a country, and a massive portion of the UFC's global market. And when a fighter reaches that level, everything around him, the pressure, the expectations, the chaos, bleeds into his private life. To understand what that world looks like, we have to leave the business behind and step into the life Oliveira lives when the cameras turn off. Away from the noise of packed arenas, away from the chants of "Do Bronx" echoing through stadiums, Charles Oliveira lives a life shaped by the same forces that once threatened to break him: poverty, loyalty, faith, and fear. Though he now stands as one of the most successful fighters in Brazilian MMA history, his daily life still carries echoes of the favelas of Guarujá, where he grew up on dirt floors and surrounded by hardships most fighters never experience. The world sees the gold chains, the stylish glasses, the champion's swagger, but those who know Oliveira understand that these are not markers of vanity, they are reminders of how far he's climbed. Inside his home, the contrasts are sharp. He provides comfort for his family that he never had himself, raising his daughter in safety he once dreamed of. Yet even in moments of peace, Oliveira carries a quiet urgency. He trains obsessively, as if each session keeps his past from catching up. To him, fighting isn't a profession, it is the bridge between the life he escaped and the one he refuses to return to. And that weight can be suffocating. Relationships, too, have felt the strain. Oliveira's devotion to the sport, the travel, the injuries, the constant emotional toll of fighting at the highest level, it has cost him milestones, celebrations, and connections that non-fighters take for granted. His closest friends describe him as warm but distant, laughing easily, yet carrying an unmistakable heaviness beneath the surface. Fame did not make him untouchable. It made him more exposed than ever. And then there is the scar that never fully healed: the fear of being forgotten. Brazil's MMA heroes are revered, but they are also replaced quickly. After Anderson Silva, Jose Aldo, and Lyoto Machida, Oliveira felt pressure not just to win, but to represent. He knew that millions saw him as the next torchbearer for a nation hungry for a champion. Every fight became more than a contest. It became a referendum on his worth. And when he lost, he didn't just fall in the rankings. He felt he had let down an entire country. This emotional burden fed directly into the chaos of his public scandals, the weight-cutting issues, the shaky performances, the moments where critics questioned his heart. They were tied not to physical weakness, but to a man battling the immense psychological cost of being Brazil's hope. He wasn't afraid of opponents. He was afraid of disappointing the people who believed in him. Yet despite this internal storm, Oliveira remains one of the most beloved figures in the sport because he embodies something rare: vulnerability with courage. He wins with emotion, loses with emotion, and fights with a sincerity that fans can feel. But even his sincerity cannot shield him from one truth. The UFC doesn't just see him as a person, they see him as a pillar, a revenue source, a symbol they cannot afford to lose. And that truth leads us to the final question. Why does the UFC fear losing Charles Oliveira more than almost any fighter on its roster? For years, the UFC has tried to present its champions as replaceable pieces in a constantly evolving sport. But Charles Oliveira exposed a flaw in that system because fighters like him cannot be replaced. Not by marketing, not by matchmaking, and not by the next rising contender. Oliveira became the backbone of the lightweight division, a division already considered the toughest in UFC history. And his presence brought something the organization desperately needed: unpredictability paired with guaranteed entertainment. No matter who he fought, Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Islam Makhachev, Oliveira created explosive, high-stakes moments that turned casual fans into loyal viewers. And loyalty is the currency the UFC values most. A fighter who can reliably elevate viewership across multiple regions is a rarity. Oliveira does this effortlessly. His fights attract millions from Brazil, a country that remains one of the UFC's largest international markets. After the fading of Brazilian icons like Anderson Silva and Jose Aldo, the UFC needed a new star who could carry the nation's enthusiasm. Oliveira became that star, and the organization knows losing him would leave a hole that could take years to fill. But his importance goes deeper than just geographic influence. Oliveira's fights consistently boost pay-per-view numbers, even when he isn't presented as the card's primary draw. His style, finisher first, always dangerous, makes highlight reels before the events even end. For the UFC, this means more clips, more views, more engagement, and more reasons for fans to buy future events. A fighter who can produce both viral moments and championship-level performances is extremely rare. Internally, the UFC also recognizes something else. Oliveira stabilizes divisions. When he fights, rankings make sense, momentum becomes clear. The next contender emerges naturally. His presence gives structure to the lightweight landscape in a way matchmakers cannot artificially create. When he is active, the division feels alive. When he is absent, it feels uncertain, and uncertainty is the UFC's greatest fear. Oliveira also brings something intangible but vital: emotional investment. Fans connect to him not because he is perfect, but because he is flawed in ways that feel human. The comebacks, the heartbreaks, the triumphs, the collapses, each chapter makes viewers care more. And when fans care, retention skyrockets. Every sport depends on stars whose stories grip audiences. For the UFC, Oliveira represents exactly that. So the question is no longer simply whether Oliveira can win another title. The deeper question is this: what happens to the UFC if Charles Oliveira is no longer part of its story? Does Brazil lose interest? Do pay-per-view numbers dip? Does the lightweight division lose its identity? Does the organization lose one of the last fighters who brings heart, danger, and unpredictability in a single package? Because the truth is uncomfortable but undeniable. The UFC needs Charles Oliveira far more than Charles Oliveira needs the UFC, and that dependency leads directly into the final chapter of his legacy. One still being written, one still surrounded by questions no one can fully answer. When the final chapter of Charles Oliveira is written, it will not be a simple tale of victories and defeats. It will be the story of a man who rose from one of Brazil's poorest neighborhoods to reshape one of the most competitive divisions in MMA history. It will be the story of a fighter who turned vulnerability into strength, chaos into momentum, and doubt into one of the most compelling careers the UFC has ever seen. Oliveira's legacy is not defined solely by his records, though the submissions, the finishes, and the highlight reel moments will live forever. His legacy is built on something deeper: the emotional connection he formed with millions who saw in him a reflection of their own battles. But even now, after everything he has accomplished, one question lingers: what truly controls the future of Charles Oliveira? Is it the UFC, driven by financial need and global influence? Is it the fans, whose love both sustains and overwhelms him? Or is it Oliveira himself, navigating the scars of his past and the pressure of a future he never expected to reach? His story remains unfinished, suspended between triumph and uncertainty, and that is what makes it unforgettable. Because with every fight, every comeback, every moment of brilliance or doubt, Charles Oliveira continues to reshape not just the lightweight division, but the very definition of what it means to survive, to evolve, and to rise again. Whatever happens next, one truth is already clear. The legend of Du Bronx is far from over.